Thank you so much for joining us today for the Pastor's Potluck Podcast. Here on the Pastor's Potluck, it's similar to a normal potluck where you might get something that you want and there may be something that you just want to pass up altogether. And that's okay. There's something here for everybody. Our goal here is to encourage you and maybe in the process entertain you. If you're ready, let's dig in. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Pastor's Potluck. So good to see you. Crazy stat. I kind of shared it with you yesterday. We had like 200 downloads from last week.
Wow.
From like our two conversations that we had. So with Moses part 2 and then the conversation that we had with Pastor Jess and that episode about the empty chair. And the blog that she does, but crazy.
Yeah.
It's awesome to see that that people kind of enjoy what we're doing.
Well, we definitely hope that's the case.
Yeah, for sure. It's just awesome just to see, something that you put just some time and effort in and try to do it right, and God blesses it. But we're continuing our conversation in Moses. It's just it's a large portion of the Bible is the story of Moses. And so continuing off from our last conversation, if you haven't listened to it, I encourage you to go back and listen to it. So this is part 3, so there's 2 other parts before this one. But where we left off was where Moses was being talked to and chosen by God to lead the Israelites out of captivity. And so he'd already had this encounter with God, the burning bush moment where he's on top of the mountain. And we're now getting into whenever he's about to go confront Pharaoh and all of that. One of the things I found really interesting before we get into this is it mentions his age before he goes and talks with Pharaoh. Moses was 80 years old, and his brother was 83, which this is such a probably not the best thing, but it's just the way society kind of looks at people that are of age of 80 years or that are would be considered seniors, and just almost kind of writes them off. It's kind of a very forgotten demographic. And I just thought that there was something there that regardless of your age, if God wants to do something through you, he's going to equip you. He's going to qualify you to be able to do those things that he has asked you to do, which I just found like super awesome.
Throughout the scriptures, I mean, there's people that are younger than what we would be comfortable with being in positions of leadership.
Yeah.
And then there are people that are way past what we would think would be the prime leadership ages as well. And like that becomes just another thing that God goes, that doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
That could be, just like with Moses saying he's not a good speaker, he goes, that doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
And like we can fill in the blank with whatever it is that we think our limitation is, and God goes, that doesn't matter to me, because if I chose you to do it, then, you're going to be the one to do it if you'll cooperate with me. And so, that's we've kind of around here really felt a little bit of a burden for that demographic, actually. And so we're actually doing something about it, creating a monthly get-together with our seniors here, because sometimes younger folks, and I'm certain I've been guilty of this, they neglect the fact that the next generation or even a couple generations in front of them have a lot to offer them.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't get those interactions to where people of those generations can pass things down to us, we really miss out. I mean, we talked about that a couple weeks ago on a Sunday, the importance of one generation passing on what they have to the next. And so, it is interesting that they mentioned Moses' age, that he's kind of past the age where we would think, like, unless you're Charles Stanley, then you shouldn't be spiritually leading or whatnot. I think that guy's going to preach until they have to carry him off the stage. But, it's interesting.
Yeah, and so he meets up with his brother Aaron. God said that, hey, since you don't feel comfortable talking, we're gonna let Aaron do all the talking. So he's hanging out with his brother, and he's telling his brother this encounter with God, and so they go to meet with Pharaoh, and through that interaction, he's following God's orders of saying, to help, throw it on your staff, it'll turn into a snake, and you lift it back up, and it won't, it'll turn back into the staff. And all throughout this time, Pharaoh, it's funny because God already told Moses what was going to happen with Pharaoh.
Yeah.
He just said, hey, his heart's going to be hardened. I'm going to give you these things, and it will soften his heart. And so you would imagine, I would just think, just if I was in his position, that once I threw it on the staff and it turned into the snake and then lifted it back up and turned back into the staff,
Yeah.
Pharaoh would just be, hey, like,
Yeah.
whatever you say is good to go.
Yeah.
And it's not the case. It just says, like, his heart was hardened.
Yeah, I mean, Pharaoh wasn't really impressed by those first couple of miracles because he had people that could replicate those, which is interesting. Like when we think about,
Yeah.
like, how was Pharaoh's magicians and these things able to replicate these very, signs and wonders that God gave Moses?
Yeah.
There's something, dark at work there. That's one of those deals. It's like, maybe for the church that we need to realize, like, not everything that looks like it's from God is actually from God, because
Ooh, that's good.
he has these like sorcerers and magicians that they too throw their staff down
Yeah.
and can do the same thing. And I think I was even just reading before we came in here, they were able to even replicate like the plague of the frogs. They were able to bring frogs, and it's like, well, what weirdness is going on with these magicians and sorcerers that allow them to mimic the very miracles and plagues that God gave Moses as the means by which? But I think all of that is just adding to the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, which is a topic. Like when you get into Pharaoh and you get into Judas, those are like, some people want to get really, really like bogged down in what is going on in the scriptures.
Yeah.
There, and they want to create full theological outworkings based on these two case studies of, did God just choose Pharaoh to harden his heart and he had no chance, or are the scriptures simply making the point that Pharaoh's heart was hardened by what God was doing? Like, what's going on there? And I don't find a lot of fruit in diving into this whole.
I think his heart was already it was already at a pretty terrible spot with the Israelites because he doubled their work.
Well,
It's like, well, now you got to go dig up your own clay to make these bricks. You got to go out and harvest the grass that goes into this mixture.
I think where I would land is we also have to understand that God already knew the final state of Pharaoh's heart.
Yeah.
So, I mean, did God harden Pharaoh's heart, or did God already know that Pharaoh's heart would be hardened? Either way, like, and again, there's like books written about this, like, this is where a lot of like our Calvinist brothers and sisters would want to get real involved with, like, well, clearly Pharaoh's heart was hardened by God, so therefore he wasn't elect, or it's just a fruitless conversation to me, because I go like, well, if we just understand that God already knows the beginning from the end, then he could allow Pharaoh's heart to be hard because he knew it was going to end up that way anyways.
Yeah.
Which I know gets into like the whole can of worms that like I'm not prepared to get into, but that's like, because I don't find a lot, because people want to know, okay, when it comes to Judas was like picked to betray Jesus, or did God already know that Judas was going to do what he did, because he already knows the end from the beginning, or was Judas just damned from the beginning?
Yeah.
Right? Oh, he just doesn't have a, like, it doesn't seem to me that it really is worth a lot of conversation when it comes to who's responsible for the hard hearts, because clearly outside of those two situations, we could also just look and go like, okay, well, I know people whose hearts are hardened towards God. Mm-hmm. Did God do that, or did they do that? And he goes, well, regardless, it doesn't really matter for our context, because if someone's heart is hardened towards God, then we should be concerned and do what we can to see them brought to faith in God and onto right terms with God.
Yeah.
Right, and so that's it. It is. I guess it's an interesting conversation for some folks. For me, I just don't find much merit in, did Pharaoh do this or did God do this, or was it in concert together because of God's knowledge?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's an interesting thing though that we see over and over, that God says that Pharaoh's heart was hardened, or that he hardened Pharaoh's heart.
Yeah.
Which could definitely just be the result of what God was doing in the situation in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so after the issue with the staff and all of that, and his guys, and then Moses' staff eating up the snakes and
Yeah.
all of that, we begin this series of 10 plagues that comes about because of that. And I've got the list here. I'm just going to quickly go through them, and you can go back and read this. This is in Exodus, and the plagues were that water turns into blood, and this is like even water that was in jars and
Yeah.
jugs and everything. Frogs, lice, flies, death of the livestock, boils on the people, hail, big weather hail, locust came and eaten everything, darkness, and then the last one, which is probably the most dramatic out of all of these. And it goes into more detail, and you can read this, like with the lice and the flies, they were just everywhere. Obviously, the death of a lot of the livestock that was there. Hail destroying crops, locusts eating the crops, darkness, which is just terrible, and then the Passover, which was the death of all the firstborn children in the land. God gave them, a list of what they needed to do to be able to be protected from that, which is kind of crazy if you go into it. They were like, yeah, you got to take this sheep, and then you got to barbecue the whole thing. You got to eat the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I like barbecue. I mean,
all
shout out
these
to Meat
plagues.
Church.
I've read and been told a couple different things about these plagues, but a lot of them, my understanding was that they were tied to different Egyptian gods.
See, I've never heard
And
that.
so it was always a way of God. What God is doing is ultimately He is humbling the most powerful man and nation on the face of the earth at this time.
Yeah.
And He's doing so through showing them that their gods are, whatever they believe about their gods, those gods are beneath Him. And that's why, like, when when Moses shows up, like, you have to think of how odd this would have been. Pharaoh is, I don't think Pharaoh is real concerned with the God of the Hebrews that he has enslaved. In fact, he probably is going to think, this isn't a real God because I enslaved his people. If he was a real God, he wouldn't let me do this.
Yeah.
So when Moses shows up on the scene, he says, the Lord has said to let my people go. And Pharaoh goes, well, who's the Lord?
Yeah.
I don't believe in the Lord. What are you talking about? I don't believe in this God that you're talking about whatsoever. So that has to be like bizarre
Yeah.
for Pharaoh to be like, someone's coming in here and telling me that some God is telling, like, I don't know this God. Why
Yeah.
would I listen to this God? And that's a really interesting deal, because that sounds a lot like probably a lot of people that we come in contact with.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't know this God that you're telling me that God's upset with me because of something I did last week or the way that I'm living my life. I don't even know this God.
Yeah.
That's literally what Pharaoh is that has to be his posture when Moses comes in and goes, Yahweh says, like, bro, I don't know Yahweh.
Yeah.
Right? That would be like akin to us, like if someone came up to us and told us, that one of the Hindu gods was upset with us, we would go like,
What?
yeah, so we don't believe in that God, or
Yeah.
fill in your blank with whoever it might be. I'll be like, yeah, but I don't. And so that's what's so weird about this. And so what God is doing is He is humbling Pharaoh by undermining the gods that he does trust in,
Yeah.
all the way to the point where he becomes literally the only true God in the story. Is what's happening there. through all these different plagues. Yes, he's humbling the most powerful man in the world, but he's also undermining the whole system of religion that he has set up in this nation. That way he will understand that he is the one true God
Yeah.
at the end of it, which Pharaoh never gets the message, really. I mean, he never really comes to understand the message until he's finally, you know, um, experiences it with that 10th plague.
Yeah.
And
With the death of his son, his firstborn.
yeah, he experiences the death of his firstborn, and then it's like, oh wow, I should have been paying attention this whole time, and that there's something there, because I told you he probably seems a lot like people that we run into in our lives, where we go like, yeah, we don't care what the Bible has to say, I'm not following that God or whatnot, and
Yeah.
then sometimes it takes like something awful happening in our life to finally get our attention. That's kind of like the path that Pharaoh was on.
Yeah.
He's like got a hard heart, hard heart, hard heart, hard heart, and the way that God eventually begins to break up our hard heart towards Him sometimes is through allowing tragedy and hardship to come our way. That's what eventually breaks our will down to the point where we can finally recognize God.
Yeah, I wouldn't say for me it was tragedy, but it was just a disruption of my life.
Oh yeah,
Whenever Erica and I found out that we were expecting Nolan, we weren't married, and it took something that disrupted my way of life,
yeah,
that began to open up my heart and break down a lot of walls because I I just needed something to get a hold of me, and I think that people tried enough to try to have
yeah,
conversations with me. They just weren't getting through because I was an adult. I was like, God, why are you treating me like a kid?
yeah.
Like it doesn't. I'm gonna do whatever I want to do.
Yeah,
And then
that's. I mean,
God said,
that's.
I've got something better for you.
Yeah, that's essentially the story a lot of people end up with.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be, and that's kind of like one of my like things in ministry. I'm always like, hey, if you could just learn from the stupid stuff that I did, it will save you so much because I
Yeah.
had to go that same route. I had to hit rock bottom and almost lose everything in my life before I would finally turn to God,
Yeah.
who I knew all the time was there because I grew up in church and had been surrounded by it and all of this. But it wasn't until I finally made a big enough mistake or a big enough mess in my life that I realized, like, I'm doing a pretty bad job of being in charge of my life, and so I had to turn it over. And so, unfortunately, too many people decide to play the role of Jonah. And
Yeah.
like the funny thing about the story of Jonah, maybe not funny, but like interesting thing is most people misinterpret that whole story
Yeah.
because they think that God's judgment is that he got swallowed by a whale. Right? You'll hear people, and I even did this early on in ministry. People would be like, "Man, he got swallowed by a whale because he wasn't doing what God called him to do." It's actually not actually what happened. Um, the judgment was that he got thrown overboard and almost drowned,
Yeah.
and that's where the two of us found ourselves. Was we kind of got thrown overboard by life and almost drowned,
Yeah.
and the whale in that story is actually God's grace that picked him back up and put him where he was supposed to be. And
Yeah.
you could say the same for the pregnancy.
Yeah.
That wasn't God's judgment upon you, that was God's whale, that you were drowning
Yeah.
in the sea of life, and he sent that whale as an act of grace to bring you to where you were supposed to be. He did the same thing for me. Megan played that role. I would never. It's not a good thing to say that Megan was my well. Okay, I'm not going to say that. I'm saying, but she was God's act of grace in my life that ultimately got me to where
Yeah.
I was supposed to be. That's what was supposed to, like, even though God hardened Pharaoh's heart, eventually, like, he was going to have a moment where he could choose a different outcome.
Yeah.
And he did not choose a different outcome.
Yeah.
And ultimately, they end up paying the ultimate price because some people go exactly through the same stuff me and you went through.
Hmm.
God throws them the life raft. God sends the whale, and they still neglect it. And
Yeah.
they instead decide to drown.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what Pharaoh does because they do end up drowning.
Yeah.
Right? They do end
Yeah.
up in the middle of the Red Sea, completely drowned because of the decision that they made.
Yeah. So after the 10th plague and Pharaoh loses his son, his heart was softened, and he looked at Moses and said, "Go ahead and take the people and go ahead and get out of here.
Yeah.
Like he's just at his wit's end. He'd lost everything essentially,
Yep.
except for his position. You know, he lost all those crops, all those livestock, and just ways of making money and stuff like that, and all the blood and I mean, it's just catastrophic event after event. And he says, "Go ahead and go." And then, what is it? Like a couple days after, he changes his heart again,
Yeah.
and he starts chasing after him. He's like, "Okay, wait, hold on, hold on."
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah,
Wait,
we
that's
need
all
to
my
get
labor.
y'all.
All my labor is walking out the door right
Yeah,
now. What was I thinking? I've got all these big plans and stuff. I'm letting it all
yeah,
go. And you do see that some in people's lives too, where they'll hit rock bottom, then they'll turn to God for a short season,
yeah,
but then they realize, like, slowly I'm losing everything that I've built up, everything that I've always wanted in my life. When God starts removing it piece by piece,
yeah,
it's like, oh, you know what? Never mind. I actually want to get back in control. I want
yeah,
to get all that stuff back that I'm losing. That's what you end up seeing in Pharaoh as well. It's like he reminds me of like the story of the sower that Jesus talks about. He says that he's scattered seeds on, and there's one that it starts to take root, but then it's robbed away by
thorns and
yeah,
weeds.
like the devil snatches it away through the pleasures of life
Oh
or
yeah,
whatever
yeah,
it is. And he goes, that's what happened in Pharaoh. There was a seed planted there that could have grown, but it got snatched away because he saw everything that he had ever worked for starting to walk out the door, and he wanted to go get that back.
yeah,
And so the the message never got fully implanted into his heart, and then he ultimately pays the price for it. I think because we kind of skipped. I did this, not you. I skipped the whole Passover thing to get to the fact that Pharaoh ultimately paid the price. But like a whole episode on the Passover would probably be probably worthwhile for a lot of people. So we could pull in some of the New Testament stuff.
yeah,
But yeah, ultimately, what we see in the plagues is, and there could even be a sense in which we could say like there is a sense of God's grace through all of that,
yeah,
because the reason why we face some of the stuff that we do in our life is because God is desperately trying to get our attention by any means necessary.
yeah,
He's trying to get Pharaoh's attention. He's trying to get Pharaoh to do the right thing, even though he keeps hardening his heart. He is trying ultimately, like he has an opportunity, and he's not going to respond the right way.
yeah. I think what happens after Pharaoh starts going after the Israelites, um, the next miracle in this story for me is probably the most dramatic and spectacular in all of the scriptures aside from the resurrection. I've always found it fascinating. They come up to the Red Sea. God commands Moses to lift up his hands with the staff, and the water just splits walls, and they cross on dry ground, which is, I mean, you try to think, logically, like, obviously God is the creator of all and can do
Yeah.
the unimaginable, or sometimes the unthinkable in situations, but it's just I've always been fascinated with it, and he just splits this body of water,
Yeah.
and they cross through it. And one of the crazy things about that part in the story is that whenever Moses begins to get tired from holding up his hands with the staff, and he begins to let them down, then we see the waters start to come back in and start to take over the area that was dry. It becomes wet again, and it starts to fill back up, and then Aaron and I don't know,
That's a different story.
this is a different story.
Yeah.
What am I doing then?
Yeah, that's during a battle that Moses has to hold his arms up, and Aaron and Hur come and hold his
I
arms
thought he
up
had to
for
hold
him.
his arms up with the Red Sea, and then he began to let his arms down, and then the water came through.
I haven't read it in a long time, but I think that you're thinking of the story of Aaron and Hur holding his arms up on the mountainside while they fight the battle down below.
I thought it
Because he
happened.
does have to hold his arms up, and while his arms are up, they're winning the battle. When his arms drop, they begin to lose the battle.
Am I
So
getting it all
I
confused?
think so.
Okay.
Because I think they just walk through on the dry ground, and it is like again, people have major issues with this story because they're like, well, that's just not possible, right? So,
Yeah.
but that is a really faulty way of looking at like any miracle in the scriptures.
Yeah.
If Jesus of Nazareth can rise from the dead, which there's good evidence that he did, it's one of the most attested to historical events, in the history of the world. If God created everything just
Yeah.
out of nothing, which there's also very good evidence for that. Once you see that those two things are very rational, then this God that's behind it all, he can do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't, even if we're like, well, it doesn't look like he does this sort of stuff anymore, right? But he was also painting a story up through human history to the point of the cross and beyond. Beyond that, he doesn't have to open up the Red Sea again if he doesn't want to. Like, he's not on trial for these miracles whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so it really, people have a lot of issues with, like, especially the Old Testament miracles like this. And he goes like, look, if there's a God that created everything, I just think that at any point in human history that he wants to intervene and do something crazy like open up a sea, he gets to do that.
Yeah.
And it's not hard for me to get on board with that if I already believe that he raised someone from the dead and created everything.
Yeah. I did get it mixed up.
Yeah.
Because
I do like that story about Aaron and her, though.
Yeah, it's next in the story. But what's interesting too is that it does mention that God was continuing to harden Pharaoh's heart and the Egyptians as they're chasing after them.
Yeah.
And so he lifts up his hand. They cross through, and he says, "Whenever you get to the other side, lift your hand up again." And then the water, they're going to chase after you, and then the water is going to come.
Yeah, they're ultimately gonna drown.
Yeah.
And that is the sad thing. When God throws you the life raft, when life is not going good, you choose not to take it, then eventually you do end up drowning in some sense.
Yeah.
Whether that's, in a very literal sense or in, just different areas of your life, whether it's the death of relationships or death of the dreams or death of your finances, like something when you reject God's hand to reach out to you, ultimately you're going to end up like Pharaoh and the Egyptians did, and you're going to experience some sort of death in your life.
Yeah. I think a lot of what Pharaoh, it's just like he just couldn't set aside his pride. Like I felt like he had his ego just kind of put in check with the death of his son.
Yeah.
And then he was just like, I've got to have something. I've already lost enough, and I'm chasing after them. I've got to get this back because, like, I've lost so much, and I need, like you said, my workforce, my manpower to be able to come back, and just couldn't let it go.
No, and not like in addition to all of this, Pharaoh thinks that he is God.
Oh yeah.
So he does have a pride issue, which all of us do, because Pharaoh is playing the role of us in this story.
Yeah.
We all want to be God of our own story. And again, this is what's happening. His pride will not let him bow his knee to another god.
Yeah.
Whatsoever. That's what, even though most people aren't crass enough to say like, "Oh, no, I'm God." That's exactly how most people behave. Is who makes the rules in your life? Oh, you do. Who decides what you do in your life? You do. Who's all of this? The decision maker, the morality police, whatever it is. If you are the one in your life that does all of that, you are God in your own life.
Yeah.
And like I said, when it comes to my story, I realized the hard way I am a really bad God. I'm a horrible God. I made a mess of my life because the way that I wanted to define right and wrong, the way that I wanted to make decisions, the way that I wanted to do things on my own always led to more and more destruction. The way that God rules my life always leads to more and more blessing. It always leads to more and more abundance or whatever it is. Even in life's difficulties, there's still blessing there. Whereas when I was God of my own life, well, I just only ever added to the destruction.
Yeah.
There was destruction. Sure, I would probably have some fun in the meantime, from time to time, but ultimately all of that ended up as destruction. And that's what happens when we choose to be God of our own life, because we're not the ones that created this life, so therefore we should not be the ones that govern this life. The one that gave life should be the one that governs it, because he knows the way to get the most out of it.
Yeah.
And that's where we get so out of whack, this whole like silly culture that we live in now with follow your heart. It's like, no, please don't follow your heart. Like, that's a horrible idea, because your heart has no idea what it's trying to do.
Yeah.
Whatsoever. Like, your heart is going to ultimately lead you towards what you think that you need rather than what you actually need, because your heart's not in the position to do that. And so we do that silly stuff in our culture. Oh, we got to follow our heart. We got to do what makes us feel good, what makes us happy, and all of this stuff. And you go, yeah, I mean, you can try that out, but eventually you're going to realize that just does not work. There is always an end to all of that. That's why, like, some of the richest people in the world are some of the most miserable people in the world, because it doesn't matter if you end up being successful, famous, whatever it is. Apart from God, most people are completely miserable.
Oh,
And
yeah.
if they're not miserable in the moment, they will have a season or a time in their life where they do become miserable at some level. And that's what happens when you choose to take God's position in your life. You're just not strong enough to sustain all that comes with that.
Trust God.
Yeah.
Trust the process. There's
So,
one
West
for,
Virginia fan, I'm tired of trusting the climb.
All right, your most favorite part of the week is here.
Oh, no.
It's time for another mystery meat.
I wish that thing just said, do you want an oatmeal cream pie? And I say, yes.
Yeah, I don't have any though.
Dang it.
Uh,
That's the only question I feel like answering right now.
do you secretly bring home stuff out of a hotel room,
No.
like the shampoo and the lotion and stuff?
Well, most of the hotels nowadays, they're getting wise to us.
They put all that
They
stuff.
put it all in the shower
and
in
lock it.
pump bottles. Yeah, which I actually really like that,
I
because
like it
those
too.
little bottles are a pain.
Well, it's
to
never
deal with.
enough.
Yeah.
Like you don't have any problem with shampoo, but it's never enough shampoo.
Yeah.
Like
No, I don't need shampoo.
no.
This is all body wash.
Yeah.
No, but Dusty Slay does have a funny joke about how he took a lamp out of.
What?
I don't know if it's a true story, but he has a joke about taking a lamp out of a hotel.
Yeah.
He's like, because everybody needs a lamp with a USB port on it.
Yeah.
He's like, you can't just find those anywhere nowadays.
You can't.
So no, I don't.
Dude, my dad used to. Like we
I
would
probably
go,
used to.
we used to go on vacations and stuff like that, and I just remember being little and just yelling, I need some soap or I need some shampoo, and he's like, look under the sink, and so there would be like a stack of like the little paper wraps.
Yeah.
soap.
Oh, I hate those little bars of soap too.
Dude, it's the worst. It's not even.
Yeah.
I don't even know if
I don't
that
know
you
what
would
it
be
is, yeah.
classified as soap. It feels like a wax bar, and you just like
Yeah.
trying to clean yourself with wax.
So this was not a bad mystery meat. I don't mind sharing that I don't take stuff from hotels.
Yeah.
I probably used to, like
Yeah.
back in the day, but now that they locked the big bottles up, which I just so appreciate that they're doing that.
Well, it's because
good
you
for
could
the
use as much
environment.
as you need.
Yeah, you
Like-
get more,
Yeah.
and it's good for the environment. And whoever they're working with now, that stuff always, at least the hotels I stay at,
Dude,
smells
it's
amazing.
Yes. Right.
Like, it's better than my stuff at home for sure.
You take a picture of it. You're like, I need to find some body wash with like.
Yeah, and it's
Eucalyptus
like, I think
mints
that
or whatever
this
it is.
all like made just for certain hotels.
Oh, dude.
And so you can't. I don't even know if you can find it out on the open market. But yeah, I do like that they're doing the big bottles now.
Yeah, I think that there's a company, because what they would do is they would, you take that bar of soap or whatever, and you only use it one time, and so they would just throw it away. And there's a company now that has found a way to make it like clean again, which is stupid if you say that about
that's
soap.
gross.
No, but what they do is they take it all, they clean it, and then they take it and they grind it up and press new bars, and then they give it out to like homeless people, so like they can, and they ship it off to like third world countries and like places, like people in places that don't have access to soap, which is weird
Yeah.
to say, but and they give it out for free.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of hotels anymore, or really staying anywhere other than my house. It's another part of the weirdness that's happening as I get older.
Yeah.
I get really creeped out staying anywhere other than my house these days.
Enlighten us. What is it? You just don't think they changed the sheets or something?
I don't know what it is. Like I used to love it, and now even if I'm staying in a nicer hotel,
Yeah.
it just grosses me out. Just the whole idea that someone else has slept here, probably a bunch of someone else's have slept here. I don't know if they changed the sheets. Someone else has used this towel before, and I don't care how hot your dryer gets. Someone else used that towel. Like just all of it. Just the older I get, just the weirder I get.
Yeah.
Like if I can help it, like I'm trying to be home.
Yeah.
I don't like hotels very much anymore. Like I would definitely prefer Airbnb, but even that still just grosses me out.
That's like living in somebody's house, though.
Yeah,
That's weirder.
all of it's weird. When you go to a hotel, thousands of people have slept in that bed.
Yeah, but they've got a certain standard
Hundreds of
of
people have used that towel and those sheets, that pillow.
They've got a certain standard of cleaning, though, that they
I
have to
know,
abide by.
but it's
where
still there.
in
There's-
Airbnb, somebody's house is
Yeah,
not.
but people still sleep in that bed.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm getting weirder as I get older.
You stay at the nicer ones, then they take care of all of that.
They do, but there's still people that slept in that bed.
Thanks, guys, for joining us today. we need to have an intervention, bruh.
Yeah, I'm only 36, and a lot of I'm getting weirder as I get older, and I feel like I've got a long ways to go. So I don't even want to know what I'm going to be like when I'm 46.
Well, that's just why we just need to pray for the second coming of Jesus to happen, and just like we don't need to worry about you any more than we do.
Yeah, either that or just pray for me, because I'm getting weirder and weirder as I get older, and I don't like it, but also I don't know.
Yep,
Pray for me.
it's all good. I still like you. You're
Well, it's
even,
good for entertainment apparently, because
dude,
I
it
keep you
cracks me up.
laughing. So
Yep. If I need a good laugh, I know what buttons. I know what questions I need to ask just to kind of get the snowball rolling down the hill.
yep.
Well, if there's any snowball questions that you need to submit to the mystery meet for Scott to answer, just let me know. And we'll get it going. But no, I think it's one of the great things about this is that like whenever these things, you dread it, but you're a team player and you're open about it. And that's what it's all about. I don't know. I've always thought it would be entertaining, but I think we've grown in answering these. And
I would like more people to ask like ministry and life based questions.
Yeah.
Like something that actually has sustenance to it. I would love to answer questions like that.
But where I take some minutes and fill them out.
I'm probably not going to do that, but
there we are, guys.
But now I've
and
given
gals.
everyone else an idea of what they could submit.
Yeah.
If you would like to know stuff about our lives or about ministry or preaching or something interesting and not stealing hotel shampoo, that would be awesome.
It's mystery.
Yes.
All righty. Thank you once again for joining us. Next week we've got Pastor Cheryl on. It's going to be a great episode. But anyways, thank you so much for listening each and every single week. We appreciate it tremendously. Thank you for supporting us and following along with all of our shenanigans here on the Pastor's Potluck Podcast. We hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening in with us today. We really appreciate it. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on social media, on Facebook, Instagram. You can also watch the video version of this on YouTube as well. All you have to do is search up the Pastor's Potluck Podcast. From all of us here, we want to say thank you, and we'll see you next week.